Okay, for today, we're gonna learn how to graph data using the Cartesian coordinate system. Remember that the Cartesian coordinate system is consist of two lines, one horizontal, which is the x-axis, and the vertical line is the y-axis. And they have a common origin or starting point, which is the point of intersection between uh, these two lines. So before going through the different steps, let's try to know what is a graph. Well, a graph is a visual representation of the relationship relationship between variables. So remember that we can present our data in different ways, one of which would be through a table, but another way is through a graph, because with a graph, it gives you visual, the visual uh, sense in showing the relationship of the variables involved. Let's say, for example, you're examining the relationship of the mass and the volume. So, uh, what do you think will happen to the mass of an object if you try to increase its volume? So, a graph will show you uh, the relationship of these two variables. So, going to the different steps, the first thing that you need to do is you need to choose the correct axis. Remember that when you're doing an experiment, as we talk in the scientific method, uh, you have two types of variables. It can be independent variable or the dependent variable. So uh, part of this particular thing in choosing the axis is that you need to identify the independent variable, independent variable, dependent variable, and the dependent dependent variable um, in the data, in the set of data that you want to graph, because specifically the independent variable is plotted on the horizontal or the x-axis. So this is very specific. So once you know the independent variable, so all the data that you have in your independent variable should be placed along the x-axis, and the dependent variable is plotted on the vertical or the y-axis. So, and this set of data that you have for your independent variable and the dependent variable would represent a point in your graph. So this would be your basis on the location to plot the location of uh, these points. Okay. So once you have done that, you need to choose the correct scaling. So to do that, you need to determine the maximum, the max, and minimum of the independent and dependent variables to be plotted. It's very important. What is the maximum value of your dependent variable and its minimum value, as well as for the dependent variable. So just make sure that when you try to choose the scales, spread the measured values across the graph as widely as possible. So you need to uh, make use of the space of your graphing paper. So you need to at least use 3/4 of your graphing paper. Remember that graph gives you a visual representation or what happens to this uh, independent and dependent variables. So you try to change remember that your independent variable is the one that is manipulated, and you try to check what happens to your dependent variable. So the scales chosen must be easy to read. So usually the multiples of 2, 5, or 10 as must have equal divisions. So this is very important. There should be, because remember, if you use the scale of 2, so the increment of each would be by 2s. And that also means that if you're going to use the division of that, they should be equally spaced to each other. And each axis should be labeled. So you need to label each axis with the symbol of what is being plotted and its unit. So meaning that if your if the one that is placed along the x-axis are your let's say time, for example, that would be your independent variable. So you place the symbol for time. Usually we just use t and then the unit. uh, if your dependent variable is the distance, so you can use the symbol of d and then the unit of m. And and after labeling each of the axes, you need to put a title. So title of your graph. So the convention is, well, you just write whatever is the quantity that is plotted along the y variable, and then you use the word versus or vs, the quantity along your x variable. So for example, your y variable, as I mentioned earlier, is distance. So that would be distance, and then this would be, the other one is time. So simple as that. That would be your title.